Hello everyone, my name is Mirhat Sharibjan and welcome back to Eurasian Express. The theme of our today's discussion is about how Russia's war against Ukraine is reshaping Central Asia and why former Soviet republics of Central Asia tend to distance themselves from the Russian Federation now. As Russia's war against Ukraine has been going on for 4.5 years, its consequences are spreading far beyond the battlefield. What began as a military conflict in Eastern Europe is steadily transforming the political and economic landscape of Central Asia. Last Friday, on the 31st of July, probably the clearest evidence came from the shores of the prominent lake of Issyk-Kul in Kyrgyzstan. At the informal summit of Central Asian leaders and Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev, Tajik President Emomali Rahmon proposed building a large modern oil refinery somewhere in Central Asia. That was another sign that Central Asian countries increasingly recognize the risk of excessive dependence on Russia, not only for security, but also for energy, for trade, transportation, and infrastructure, critical infrastructure. Over recent months, Ukrainian drone strikes have repeatedly damaged Russian oil refineries and fuel depots. While Moscow insists that its energy sector remains stable, the effects of those drone attacks by Ukrainian military forces become increasingly visible. Russian regions, especially those located far from Moscow and St. Petersburg, have experienced fuel shortages. Long lines have formed at gas stations. Prices have risen, and even fuel theft from trucks and private vehicles has become a growing problem. To protect its domestic market, the Kremlin imposed restrictions and eventually bans on exports of gasoline, diesel fuel, and aviation fuel. Those decisions exposed a strategic vulnerability that had existed in some of the Central Asian nations for decades. Countries like Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan depend overwhelmingly on Russian refined petroleum products. When Russian exports slowed, shortages and higher prices quickly spread across the economies of these two Central Asian nations. So we can say that Tajik President Emomali Rahmon's proposal to build a large oil refinery somewhere in Central Asia reflects the realization of one thing. As long as Russia controls the supply, political events inside Russia, or fails to control the war against Ukraine, military developments with Ukrainian military forces involvement, all of this can directly affect everyday life hundreds of, even thousands of kilometers away. Instead of depending on Russian refineries, why shouldn't Central Asia develop its own? The region already possesses many of the necessary ingredients. Kazakhstan is one of Eurasia's largest oil producers. Uzbekistan also produces oil. Turkmenistan is a major natural gas exporter. And now the South Caucasus nation of Azerbaijan, which is also known for its oil production capabilities, enormous capabilities, I would say, has become an increasingly important participant in the so-called consultative meetings of Central Asian leaders. Azerbaijan is not simply another oil-producing country. It has become a strategic bridge between Central Asia and Europe through the Caspian Sea and the so-called Middle Corridor, offering alternative transport and energy routes that bypass Russia. Just as importantly, Baku has demonstrated a growing willingness to pursue an independent foreign policy, even when it irritates Moscow. Following its victory in Karabakh and its increasingly confident regional diplomacy, Azerbaijan has shown that countries in the former Soviet space no longer automatically defer to Russian preferences. That makes its presence in this emerging regional format especially significant. What is also very important, like 4 of the 5 Central Asian nations, Azerbaijan is also a Turkic-speaking nation, sharing language, culture, and history with the majority of the Central Asian nations. The consultative meetings of Central Asian leaders themselves are becoming more than diplomatic gatherings. Originally proposed by Uzbek President Shavkat Mirziyoyev in 2017, the format has gradually evolved into a mechanism through which Central Asian states coordinate policies without external powers sitting at the table. The addition of Azerbaijan expands that vision beyond Central Asia itself, creating a wider regional partnership based on shared economic and strategic interests. At the same time, Kazakhstan, the region's largest economy, is also sending increasingly confident signals. In recent weeks, Kazakh President Kassym-Jomart has publicly urged Russian President Vladimir Putin to freeze the war in Ukraine and return to negotiations based on what he described as an updated Istanbul framework. Tokayev, sitting next to Putin, stressed that Kazakhstan has always respected the Ukrainian culture, language, and history, adding that many, including his country, did not understand the nature of the Russian war against Ukraine. Tokayev's boldness shocked not only people in Russia, but elsewhere in the former Soviet Union. I would not be mistaken if I said that it reflected not only Kazakhstan's desire for regional stability, but also a broader shift in political confidence across Central Asia. Taken together, these developments suggest that Russia's influence in the region is no longer what it once was. This, of course, does not mean that Moscow is disappearing from Central Asia. Despite Western sanctions imposed on Russia, it remains an important economic partner, a major labor market for millions of Central Asian migrants, and a significant security actor. But surely, the balance is changing. Ironically, Russia's own invasion of Ukraine, another former Soviet republic, has accelerated that process. The war has weakened Russia economically, forced it to redirect enormous financial and military resources to the battlefield, disrupted traditional supply chains, which made its neighbors reduce strategic dependence on Moscow wherever possible. The search for alternative fuel supplies is only one example. The expansion of trade through the Middle Corridor is another. Even closer cooperation among Central Asian states themselves is also an example. And Azerbaijan's growing integration into this regional framework represents yet another important piece of that transformation. It is surely not clear if a new regional refinery actually will be built. Such a project would require billions of dollars, long-term investment, agreements on crude oil supplies, and most importantly, a political consensus over where exactly the refinery should be located. But perhaps the most important point is not if construction begins tomorrow. It is that the conversation itself is taking place now. The countries of Central Asia are beginning to ask a strategic question that would have seemed almost unnecessary just a few years ago. How can we make sure that decisions made in Moscow no longer determine our economic future? If that question continues to shape regional policy, then the consequences of Russia's war against Ukraine will extend far beyond Europe's borders. They will permanently reshape the geopolitical balance of Central Asia, especially if we take into account China's super active involvement into economic projects in the region, and the growing interest of the European Union and the United States in Central Asia. Thank you for watching. If you found this analysis useful, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments below. I'll see you next time on Eurasian Express. Again, my name was Mirhat Sharibjan. Sağ salamat болыңыздар, hoşça kalın, salamat poşet, до побачення, до скорых встреч.